No, are you kidding?
Did I kind of? Okay.
You're on.
Okay. Well, couple of things.
Yeah.
First, yeah, the second step, Mr. Wilson. So yeah, so I said infringement, you go through 2 steps. The first one is claim construction, which is everything I just talked about. The second step is comparison, right? So once you've construed the claim of the patent, then you have the allegedly infringing invention, and you compare the two, right? And you figure out if they are substantially similar under the doctrine of equivalence or not, and that's it. Now that comparison is done by the jury. So, you know, that's your typical black box kind of thing. You give it to the jury and they decide. So I don't have that much to say about that. About abandonment, Mr. Lunsford was kind enough to come by and we talked about it. It's sort of like the equivalent of statute of limitations latches, in the sense that when it comes to public disclosure of the invention, you will always have that 1-year grace period. So that's sort of like the statute of limitations, right? And if the 1-year period lapses and you haven't filed after the public disclosure, you lost your right to the patent, and that's it. The abandonment comes in the context when you haven't publicly disclosed. So say you invent something, you throw it in the attic, and you don't file, and you don't do anything with it for 10 years, and then somebody else comes up with it, files the patent, and you raise your hand, and you're like, oh no, I came up with that first. Well, too bad. You lost your right to claim priority, because you are deemed to have abandoned the invention and the right to have a patent over it. So in that sense, it's like latches, right? And it's not a set time period. It's this idea of, you know, you haven't been reasonably diligent in securing your right. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and also I didn't mention that the term abandonment also gets used during prosecution at the patent office. Once you've filed your application, there are various scenarios like failure to respond to an office action within a certain period of time, failure to pay maintenance fees that will deem your application or patent to have been abandoned.
And you lose priority again.
Yeah, or essentially like your application gets thrown out and you would lose priority, or if you didn't pay your maintenance fees on the patent at that point is now public domain. But yeah, but that's different and, you know, involves issues before the patent office.
Right, and then the casebook talks a little bit about that in the part where it describes the process of prosecution. But yeah, you should bear in mind that those are 2 different types of abandonment. And they should also not be confused with trademark abandonment. Anyway. So yeah, those 2 things have been cleared up, and now I wanted to just briefly go over, so any other questions about infringement or anything else I've talked about so far? All right, I just wanted to briefly mention the defenses. So as I mentioned already, right, any patent invalidity and any of the failure of a patent to comply with any of the requirements we have gone over can be raised as a defense during an infringement procedure. The other thing that happens sometimes is that a potential defendant will go to court first seeking a declaratory judgment as to the invalidity of a patent, right? So I might want to produce X thing and somebody has a patent over it and I think his patent is invalid. I don't need to wait for them to sue me. I can go and sue them for declaratory relief, stating that the patent is invalid. I have to make a showing for standing purposes that that there's a reasonable threat that I'll get sued, right? So, if you've got a cease and desist letter you're good to go. Or, you know, potentially things short of that, like they've sued somebody else or things like that. But so you can do that, and then, you know, once the real plaintiff sort of answers the complaint, you know, everything gets sort of rearranged in the procedure, and it proceeds pretty much as an infringement suit would. The other defenses that I want to mention now are other things that don't have to do with invalidity. The first one is the experimental use defense, which is very similar to the experimental use exception I mentioned a while ago. And the idea is, if you are truly only using somebody else's patent for the purposes of experimenting, you will be excused from infringement. However, having said that, this has been interpreted rather narrowly by the courts, okay? And so situations in which you might be deemed to be covered by this defense are when you're doing research to check the adequacy of the specification, research to check the validity of the claims in the patent, research where the research user would be an ordinary consumer of the patented invention, and research relating to improvements or alternative methods. So one of the things is, well, you might be considering whether the patent is invalid because it doesn't work, it's inoperable, or you think that it doesn't fulfill the enablement requirement, and so you might try to put it together following the specifications, and then it turns out you were able to put it together, and then you say, oh, it is a valid patent, right? And then you stop using it. You would be excused in that case under experimental use. But again, it's a very limited defense. The courts have said, and this is a quote, that it is limited to actions performed, quote, for amusement, to satisfy idle curiosity, or for strictly philosophical inquiry. So, you know, you are unlikely to get clients that would qualify under that, unless, you know, you have a professor as a client or something like that, somebody who's doing scientific research and for some reason ends up getting sued by an over-eager patentee. The second one, inequitable conduct. Now, this is again, and the experimental use defense and this one are judge-made defenses, and inequitable conduct is your classic unclean hands type of defense, and it comes up particularly if the patentee has been less than straightforward and honest during the prosecution process. Right? So a patentee might amend his or her claim, like the Gentry Gallery folks did, right? Somebody else came up with a better idea, but I've already got a prosecution process going on, and so I might try to amend it to get the other person's idea so that I have priority over them, and I might lie to the Patent and Trademark Office in the process. That might result in an inequitable conduct defense being applied if I eventually try to sue somebody for infringement. Let's see what else. Patent misuse. This one comes up a lot. It's sort of, again, similar to equitable doctrines of abuse of right, for example, and it comes up in an antitrust context, right? I have a valid patent over something, but then I try to use it to monopolize some other market, to extend my monopoly power over something that I wouldn't have had a claim over under patent law. I might be guilty of patent misuse, and then somebody can raise that as a defense also. And then finally, the one that I want to talk a little bit more about is exhaustion, right? Which is same thing as the first sale doctrine in copyright, and it's sometimes called first sale, but for some reason it's more often called exhaustion in the patent context. And the idea here again is that your claim over your exclusive right is exhausted once you've sold a particular embodiment of your invention. The logic being, well, you've already made your profit, right? That sale was the profit that we guaranteed you would make, but you can't now, every time that thing gets sold down the line, claim the profit again. And so I might have patented a machine that, I don't know, a refrigerated keg, and I sell it to one of you guys, and then you use it for a couple of years, and you graduate from college, and then you sell it to a freshman. Well, you're free to do that, right? The first time you bought the thing, you bought the rights to use that invention, and now you can do with that one particular machine whatever you want. Now that does not give you the right to make more machines of the same type, right? So just like in copyright, I bought this book. I can do with this one book whatever I want. I can burn it, I can sell it, I can do whatever I want with it. But I can't make photocopies of it, right? I can't make 100 copies of the book and sell them. Same thing with patent, right? It gives you the right to use that particular embodiment of the invention, but not the right to make more embodiments of that invention. So the word make sort of takes the place of the word copy in patent versus copyright. And that becomes very, very relevant in our case with Mr. Bowman that I was talking about a minute ago, right? Because Mr. Bowman claims, well, I bought your seeds once, I planted them, and I didn't buy them from you, I bought them from a third party, right? So there had been several first sales already. And now and the reason why he did that, I would imagine, is to get around the licensing agreement that you normally sort of consent to when you buy the seed for planting. So Monsanto sells seed for planting, and they sell seeds for consumption. When you buy the seeds for planting, you enter into this licensing agreement that says you can only plant them once. But when you buy them for consumption, there is no such licensing agreement. And in any case, he didn't buy them from Monsanto. He bought them from a third party that bought them from Monsanto. And so he says, hey, I'm not bound by that license agreement. Now, the problem is, of course, that Monsanto says, yes, but you are making more of my patented seeds. By planting them in the ground and having a plant grow and then have its own seeds, those new seeds, you have made them. And I, as a patentee, have the exclusive right to make these seeds. Bowman says, no. Your right to control the patented seed was exhausted when I bought it. And it's not, the reason why you have seeds in the first place is for them to grow and multiply. And so Bowman makes this argument of there are these self-replicating technologies, right? And these self-replicating technologies should not be controlled by the patentee after they've been sold. If they replicate by themselves after you sell them, then tough luck, right? That's the nature of your invention, and you shouldn't be able to claim control over the future generations of those, in this case, seeds, or of those self-replicating technologies. The court did not buy Mr. Bowman's argument at all. And they say this case reminded me a lot of the Aerial case, in the sense that the court says, you're just trying to get around our rule. You are just a smartass, and you are doing something with the intent of getting around the patent restriction and not having to pay Monsanto for their innovation. And we are not going to let you do that. And so they say the exhaustion principle doesn't apply in this case, because you are not just using the one seed that you bought, you are making new ones. And by making new ones, you're infringing in the exclusive right. So, if you're a farmer and you buy seeds from Monsanto, you can plant them 1 year, and then you have to kill your whole crop and replant new seeds the next year that you buy again from Monsanto. And my question for you, before we leave for the rest of the semester, is, do you think that's right? I know you think it's right. But let me see if somebody else will bite first.
It seems pretty wasteful. Yep, saw that.
It seems wasteful. I think that's a great argument, right? What do you answer to the wasteful argument?
I'll play devil's advocate here, but you said earlier, if you take that book and copy that book, you sold that copy of that book, or heck, even making the copies of the book is copyright infringement.
Right.
So why should making copies of the seed not be patent infringement?
It seems like
It's just as wasteful, right?
It seems like the difference between a person using a photocopier and nature doing what it does.
Nature.
Right.
It's a natural process.
Except that it's
I knew that's what you were going to say, right?
except that it's not natural. It's a genetically modified seed. It would have never occurred in nature
Right.
on its own if it weren't for Monsanto.
It wouldn't exist if I hadn't come up with it. And the court makes another argument that I think is a good one. It says, well, these aren't magical seeds that grow by themselves.
Right.
You planted them, you watered them. It isn't just, it just happened, you very deliberately reproduce these seeds in a very efficient and cost-effective way.
But Monsanto didn't do that either. Monsanto wasn't responsible for their growth either. They just sort of, they're responsible maybe for like the original process. But yeah, I feel like it's wrong to somehow appropriate like a living process, whether they originally invented the thing. I just feel like that, I don't know, I feel like
Does anybody, yeah.
You go to like a nursery and you buy some plants and you plant them in your yard. You have ownership of those plants and anything that comes out in future generations, and you don't have to go pay the nursery for more for the seeds. But my other point is though, Monsanto, if they're genetically engineered to begin with, then couldn't they engineer them not to reproduce or prevent them from,
That is a great point that I thought of as I was reading it, because the court says, well, poor Monsanto, if you don't set this rule, then they're only going to be able to sell one seed, right? And they're going to get $5 for it, and that's it. And then they're not going to make any more genetically modified seeds. And I immediately thought, no, they'll find a way to have the seeds not grow, They'll just modify it some more.
not in that process.
Right. And they haven't had to because patent law doesn't require them to.
And I think that would be a bit impractical too, because the whole point is to propagate their new species.
It seems
of
wasteful
corn.
too, right?
They want to be able to sell them to the farmers so that, you know, they don't want the population of Monsanto corn to be limited to what Monsanto itself can grow, because they only get one generation and all the seeds that generation produces are sterile. They want to, you know, they'd never recoup their investment that way. And I think that really goes to the real heart of what's driving the decision, is the policy issues. If you allow first sale doctrine to apply to these genetically modified seeds, the entire, the entire industry of genetically modifying crops would go away, because you could never make any money.
The industry will be paralyzed.
But they have the whole world market, right? I mean, they're not just selling to the US, they have the whole world market to go to. I mean, so like.
But they have patents in those countries too. You know,
Right,
like everywhere they sell their seeds, they have patent protection.
So, I mean, then what happens if, you know, say there's this cross-pollination thing and all the farms in the US hypothetically have Monsanto seeds? That means they have a patent over every single crop in the US? I mean.
I think that's what it's like right now, right?
Right, exactly. I mean, if you drive across the country, that's exactly what you see. I mean, even just from the freeway. Are these?
Does anybody else get this gut feeling, as
I'm
Ms. Martins
crazy, it's
get, that
cool.
this is just wrong? Yeah, I get it too, and I don't, you know,
I just don't think we should look too closely at the mechanism for the copying. Copying's copying.
yeah.
You know, it's like, does the fact that on the internet, if you download a book from Barnes and Noble's Nook site, you know, probably 30 copies of that book are made along the way as you download it. Could each of those intermediaries now sell copies of their copies because they, you know, that's a copy of the book?
Is it not different though that
Yeah.
it's a staple of like people's diet, or that it's a staple of the economy? We're not talking about a book. We're talking about soybeans. We're talking about corn. We're talking about wheat. Things that are literally, they make up, you know, a huge percentage of the agricultural economy, and actually like a lot of, you know, the building blocks of what we eat in this country and what the world eats. I think there's like a fundamental difference between books, you know, copying books and copying
Or even machines,
seeds.
right?
Yeah, I mean.
And I think here's the deal. I agree with the court in that this is the only reasonable way of reading the statute. What I might disagree with is the statute, right?
Yeah, because it seems like what you're really saying is living organisms should be a subject matter, should have a subject matter exclusion.
Right.
Right.
But until that happens, you know,
Right.
you can't read that in, you know, the court can't introduce that.
Right.
Right. Which takes us back to Chakrabarty, right, and the discussion that we had before. And, you know, as I was rereading the case today for class, I thought from an economics perspective again, right? Because law and economics tends to only concentrate on efficiency and forget about distribution questions. And if you think about this a little bit, it begins to look like an economic distribution issue. And what I mean by that is, it used to be that farmers had the knowledge and the technology to develop better crops. And now we have these entities that are not farmers, whatever that means, right? But and bear with me, it's a very subjective kind of valuation that I'm giving, right? They're not human beings that have a farm, that tend to the pigs, that have children, that reproduce, that have this whole humanity that we tend to value. There are these entities that are solely in the business of mass producing seeds, and they have appropriated that knowledge and that technology that used to belong to the farmers. And to me, that is at least troubling, right? Something that we should think about as a society. Because yes, it's more efficient. There's no question that it's economically more efficient, and we produce more soybean and more corn than we ever have. But in the process, we redistributed wealth. Let's not kid ourselves. The farmers used to have the land, and now they don't. And at least part of that, right? I mean, there's 100 other factors, but at least part of that has to do with the fact that somebody else has now appropriated this technology and this knowledge. And yes, they've improved it, there's no question, right? They've genetically modified seeds and they've done these tremendous things. Well, you know, the Mayans also crossbred corn, maize, as they called it, and genetically modified it by crossbreeding. And all of that knowledge, all of that wealth has been redistributed. Has it been, is it fair or not? That's a whole other question, right? And I think that's but I think we should be asking that question and acknowledging the fact that this isn't just about efficiency. It also has an effect in the distribution of wealth.
Well, I guess I don't get that worried about it because the outside of patent's only good for 20 years.
Right.
You know, it's not like they forever and irrevocably obtained a monopoly on all soybeans.
That's true.
It's a 20-year limited monopoly
But it's
in exchange for the technology they developed.
But it's something
Do they
we should
have, like-
consider, for example, when we talk about extending or contracting that 20-year term.
I was gonna say too,
Right.
I mean, they could just continue, you know, like improving, you know,
Well, and maybe they'll get a new patent on that new one,
Right.
but generation 1 is in the public domain.
Right.
And everyone can use it. And so generation 4 has to be leaps and bounds better for anyone to think that it's worth getting, you know, to entering into a licensing agreement with them for whatever their new version is.
It's like Nexium and Prilosec, right? I mean, once Prilosec lost its patent and became generic, I just kept buying Prilosec because Nexium is a little better, but it's not that much better. And it's not until, you know, the patent runs out on Nexium that then you start buying the Nexium because the improvement is not as big. And again, I mean, the free market should take care of it, right? And I'm okay with that. And I realize that it leads to efficiencies if the market is working well. But I guess all I'm trying to point out is we shouldn't only think about the efficiency results. We should also think about the redistributive results, right? What happened to the wealth of that farmer middle class that existed in America? Where are they now? And what consequences does that have on the nation as a whole? As a matter of policy, right? Well, and the economist in me will tell you, well, that's creative destruction, right? They're supposed to learn how to code and get a job coding instead of farming. Or get a job, you know,
And, you know,
teaching.
and I have no love of Monsanto, but I think it's unfair to lay the disappearance of the small American farmer at their feet.
Right.
You know, I mean, there are lots of economic factors that are going into that. You know, a lot of
Including-
them has to do with, cuts for corporations and the ability
Right.
of agricorps,
Right.
large agricorps, because of tax breaks they get and organizational benefits they get to simply grow and make more money than a small farmer can.
And all kinds of regulation. I mean, it's not just the Patent Act either,
Farm Bill.
right? It's all kinds of things.
Yeah.
But anyway, I just think it's an interesting case, in part because, I mean, it just smacks some people like you and me wrong.
And also I would say that, you know, there's also a resurgence of the small farmer. You know, there's
Yeah.
a whole revolt
Yeah.
against genetically modified plants. You
That's
know,
what I was just thinking,
Yeah.
like, there's naturally a pendulum swing in the other direction, so people start asking for less interference from people they don't know or sources they don't know, and so the economy will swing back in the other direction, but we've seen the pendulum swing already
And
in
it's,
the
and it's,
direction that's worrisome.
and it's the market, right?
Right,
That's the
right.
beauty of the market. And I think, I mean, again, I have less trouble with the market than I do with the government, in the sense that sometimes the market isn't allowed to work its magic, you know, and you have all these subsidies of big agriculture and oil industries and everything else. And you know, and I don't want to sound like what Colbert refers to as truthiness, right? This idea that I'm going to go with my gut instead of my brain. I don't mean to say that, but I feel like sometimes when my gut tells me something is wrong, it's because I need to analyze it more with my brain, right? It's sort of like a trigger to, hey, take a closer look at this. Don't just go with your gut, but take a closer look at it. And I can't blame the court. I think they had to do that. With the act as it is and the consequences for policy and the way the market is right now, it's not a change for the court to make. Right? I think it's a change for Congress to make if it is to be made at all. But I just thought it was a good example of this idea of, let's just stick to efficiency and not think about how this affects the distribution of wealth. And at the end of the day, you know, so I started the course by saying IP isn't property, or isn't exactly the same thing as property. But it is in a lot of ways, right? It's subject to injunctions, it gives you exclusive rights over things, it has a lot of things that look like property. And property law is redistribution of wealth. Right? That is what property law is. It grabs something that's out there for everybody to enjoy and gives it to one person. And this is the classic legal realist theory. I mean, this is nothing new. I'm not coming up with a new idea, but it's an idea that I think has been forgotten for a long time. And it's very easy to see the status quo that the law establishes as the natural way of things, right? As the God-given rights of different people. And it's not that simple. We've created a system of laws that grants certain rights to certain people and takes certain rights from other people. And we do that because there might be good reasons, right? Because we need to establish property laws so that we can have functioning markets. Because we need to have clear boundaries so that, what's the Robert Frost poem, right? Good fences make good neighbors. Which of course he meant to say the exact opposite, but you know. But the guy who says good fences make good neighbors also has a point. But we should look at the reasons why we have those rules and not take those rules as ends in themselves, I guess is what I'm saying. And so with that philosophical message, I will leave you guys to your own devices with the exams. Oh, I forgot. Do you guys want to do a review session? Yeah. So our exam is pretty late, so we have a bit of leeway. Any preferred? What? It's relatively late, no?
I'm just saying when.
On the last Thursday, Thursday of the second week.
Yeah, well,
No.
I know the 11th.
11? Yeah, 12 is Friday. Okay, 11.
Yeah. So the exam is on the 11th. When do you guys want to do the review session?
Oh, I thought it was like right.
Friday the 5th?
Friday the 5th?
No.
Tuesday the 9th?
Wait, hold on. What day?
Exams at 1?
Yeah.
Just do it on that Thursday at 11.
I'll do it. I don't care. But you guys might have other exams. Is there any day that you don't have exams? Not
Friday, Tuesday.
Friday or Tuesday? You don't like Friday. Anybody not like Tuesday the what? The 8th? No, the 9th?
What time could we do it?
Anytime.
We can do it after regular work hours.
I'm free as a bird.
I still feel like Friday the 5th would be better. Can we vote on that?
But
That's my solution to everything with the,
that's like why would you want that? That's like a week before the final.
because I have 4 finals the next week.
I have 3.
Yeah, I've got 3 minutes. Well,
That would be mine.
I just don't think
That's
that's
unfortunate.
effective, but that's just my opinion. A review session is to review, so you have it in your head before the final. So.
All right. Who votes for Friday? 1, 2, 3, 4. Who votes for Tuesday? 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Are you voting for Tuesday? Yeah. Because you're the deciding vote. It's his fault.
I have 4 the second week too, but Tuesday's better because it's closer to the exam.
All right. So Tuesday the 9th at 5 o'clock.
Are you gonna get a room at that time?
Does that work for you, Mr. Lunsford?
I could make that work, yeah.
Anybody? I can't make it at 5?
I can make it, but could I possibly do it a little more earlier?
That's Mr. Lunsford.
Why don't
I
if
mean,
you're
I'm just one person, you know, getting it after work hours is good for me because I work, but, you know, everyone else needs it at another time.
I think you're gonna have to check the room availability too, because I think that's when they do the other.
Yeah, I know.
Do we have anything
But we're not that many, so we can squeeze in somewhere. We'll do it at my place. You know.
Right.
I guess so. It's gonna suck anyway.
So should we just go tentative on that, Tuesday at 5 for right now?
Tuesday at 5. Going once. Going twice. So, Tuesday the 9th at 5 p.m. in a room to be in